Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Education Board.
Hello students, welcome to TV learning program. My name is Benon. I will be taking Senior 1 students. Students, as you know, in our environment, we have living and non-living organisms. There are some traits or characteristics which show living organisms. Do you remember them? One of them is nutrition. Another one is growth. Another one, respiration. We also have reproduction, movement, we also have sensitivity, and last one is expression. These are 7 characteristics which show that an organism is living. If an organism has all these, that means it is living. When we start with this one, nutrition, there are different reasons why organisms feed. And as you know, when we talk about organisms, we mean animals and plants. Some of these organisms make their own food. Others depend on other organisms for food. Can you tell me which organisms make their own food? Green plants and some bacteria. They make their own food. Other animals depend on plants for food, or they depend on other animals. That means nutrition is very important to animals. Now, what do you understand when people talk about nutrition? Or sometimes we can say feeding. Nutrition means depending on food nutrients or getting food nutrients which are needed by the body. And nutrients are chemical substances that organisms need to live. Nutrients are chemical substances that organisms need in order to live or to survive. Why do they need food nutrients? 1, to get energy for daily activities. Organisms feed or they get food so that they can get energy for daily activities. When we say daily activities that organisms do, we can give different examples. One of them is movement. Moving from one place to another needs energy. That's why organisms have to get nutrients. Contraction and relaxation of muscles. This is an activity which needs energy. Remember, we have different organs in our body, like the heart. The heart is a pumping organ because it pumps blood to different parts of the body. In that process of pumping blood, there is need for relaxing and contracting, which means there is need for energy. Our eyes open and close. That means muscles contract and relax. There is need for energy. Remember, we have the brain, which is a very important organ of the body because we use it when we are thinking, when we are reasoning. And it is made up of very many cells. Those cells need food nutrients to get energy. So, organisms get food nutrients in order to get energy. Some of the food nutrients are building blocks for growth and repair. What does it mean when we say building block? That means important unit. Okay? The important or the simple units which are very important. Example, when we have glucose, or when we have what we call proteins. Proteins are building blocks of the body. Another function is substances that enable organisms to function and stay healthy. What does it mean? Some of the food nutrients we eat are very important because they protect our body from diseases. So these are some of the main functions why organisms feed. They feed to get energy for different activities of the body. They feed and get nutrients which are building blocks of the body. In the process of feeding, they get nutrients which protect the body from diseases. That's why nutrition is very important to living organisms. Now, when we come to different nutrients, they are classified into 6 classes. We have carbohydrates, we have proteins, we have mineral salts, we have lipids, we have vitamins, we also have water. Those are 6 different classes of nutrients that our body needs. Those nutrients, we get them from different foods we eat, and they have different functions in our body. They don't perform the same functions. They have different functions. Example, some of them provide energy to our body. Some of them protect our body from diseases. Some of them make structures or organs of the body. Some of them cool the body, which means they are important and they perform different functions in our body. Our lesson today will be about one of those nutrients, and this is carbohydrates. Students, why do we need carbohydrates in our body? What can we eat to get carbohydrates? That is our lesson today. And carbohydrates are nutrients, as we have said, which are made up of elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Remember, these are elements you learn. We have carbon, and the symbol for carbon is C. We have hydrogen. The symbol for hydrogen is H. Then we have oxygen. The symbol for oxygen is O. These are 3 main elements which make carbohydrates. I repeat, we have carbon. The symbol for carbon is H. We have hydrogen. The symbol for hydrogen is H. We have oxygen. The symbol for oxygen is C. Then, why do we need carbohydrates in our body? Carbohydrates provide energy to our body. Carbohydrates provide energy to our body. As we have said, we need energy to perform different functions. Carbohydrates also store energy. That means in our body, some of the carbohydrates can be stored so that they provide energy in case we need it. Take an example. When you are doing a lot of sports, you need a lot of energy. So that energy comes from carbohydrates we eat. So when they are stored in our body, more especially in our muscles and liver, can be used when you're doing heavy activities like sports. Carbohydrates are building macromolecules. Students, here there is a word macromolecule. When we say macro, it means large. These are large molecules which are in our body. We are going to see some of them. Carbohydrates spare proteins and lipids for other functions. What does this point mean? It means that when we don't have carbohydrates, lipids can be used as the source of energy. When we don't have lipids in our body, in most cases during the time of starvation, proteins can be used to provide energy. So to avoid lipids and proteins being used as the source of energy, carbohydrates are the ones which are used, which are essential, which are used for the first time. That's why they say when carbohydrates are being used as the source of energy, lipids and proteins are used for other functions. So those are some of the functions of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates have different classes, or they're classified in three main categories. One of them is monosaccharide. Monosaccharide. Another one is disaccharide. And the third one is polysaccharide. When we say monosaccharide, you can see this word has mono. It also has saccharide. Mono means one. Saccharide means sugar. These are sugars we call simple sugars. We can give example. Examples, we have glucose, we have fructose, we also have galactose. These are three examples of monosaccharide sugars. We can also call them simple sugars. They are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Let us take a simple formula for glucose. Glucose has the formula C6H12O6. You can see, as we said, we have carbon, we have hydrogen, we also have oxygen. So that is what it means that carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Then we also have what we call disaccharides. Students, what does the word di mean? Di means two. And as we have seen, saccharide means sugars. Di means two, and then saccharide means sugar. We can give examples of disaccharides. We have maltose, we have sucrose, we also have lactose. We have maltose, we have lactose. We also have sucrose. Where do we find sucrose? We can find sucrose in sugarcane. Have you ever eaten a sugar cane? That's where we can find sucrose. That sweetness you hear, that sweetness you enjoy when you are eating sugarcane comes from sucrose. Where do we find lactose? Lactose, we find it from breast milk. Have you ever seen a mother breastfeeding a young baby? When the mother is breastfeeding, that milk has lactose sugar. So babies like it. It is sweet. Then maltose, we can find it in different foods we eat. Like when you eat potatoes, when you eat cassava, you can find there maltose in stored form, which we call starch. Now, as we have said, di means two, saccharide means sugar. Why did they say these are disaccharide sugars? It's because they are formed from two monosaccharides, from two simple sugars. Take an example. Maltose is formed from glucose plus glucose. Lactose is formed from glucose and galactose. Sucrose is formed from glucose and fructose. All these processes are formed by the process of condensation, by loss of water. Now, these are disaccharide sugars because they are formed from two monosaccharide sugars, which means maltose is a disaccharide because it is formed from glucose and glucose. Lactose we find in breast milk is a disaccharide sugar because it is formed from glucose and galactose. Sucrose we find in sugarcane is a disaccharide because it is formed from glucose and fructose by the process called condensation, or we can say by loss of water. Another class of sugar we have seen is polysaccharide. When we say polysaccharide, we mean complex sugars because the word poly means many. This one means many. And then as we have seen, saccharide means sugar. These are complex sugars which are formed from simple sugars. Examples, we can give example. Here we can give starch. We can give another example of cellulose. We can give another example of glycogen. These are some of the examples of polysaccharide sugars. We have starch, we have cellulose, we have glycogen. Students, starch is a complex sugar which is formed from many glucose molecules. That means when many glucose molecules combine together by loss of water, they form starch. Where do we find starch? Starch is found in plants. Remember, plants can store food in leaves, plants can store food in stems, or plants can store food in roots. It depends on the type of the plant. Now, they store food in form of starch. Then, cellulose is a complex sugar we find in structures of organisms, in most cases in plant cells. Remember, plant cells have what we call cell wall, the outermost part of the cell, which is made up of cellulose. Students, we have what we call glycogen. Glycogen is another complex sugar which is made from many glucose molecules. This one, we find it in animals. Animals store glycogen. This is what happens. When you eat food which has a lot of sugar, like glucose, the body converts that glucose to glycogen, and then glycogen can be stored. Here we can say in muscles, because remember, muscles need to contract and relax. In that process, there is need for energy, which comes from glucose. So they store glycogen, so that when they need a lot of energy, glycogen will be converted back to glucose, and glucose will be used as the source of energy in the process we call respiration. If you want, you can define respiration as the process of breaking down food to produce energy. So we have seen starch, cellulose, and glycogen are complex sugars. Students, we have seen 3 different classes of carbohydrates. Monosaccharides, we have seen mono means one, saccharide means sugar, and these are simple sugars. We have seen examples like glucose, galactose, and fructose. Disaccharide sugars are sugars which are made from 2 simple sugars. That's why we say they are di, because they are formed from 2 simple sugars. We have seen examples like maltose, which is formed from 2 glucose molecules. We have seen example of lactose, which is formed from glucose and galactose. We have seen sucrose, which is formed from glucose and fructose. Then we have seen polysaccharide sugars, starch, cellulose, and glycogen. Students, what can we eat to get carbohydrates? We can eat food like corn or maize. We can eat cassava. These are different foods we can eat to get carbohydrates. We can eat maize. We can eat cassava. We can eat rice. We can also eat potatoes. What else can we eat in order to get carbohydrates? We can also eat pasta. These are some of the foods we can eat in order to get carbohydrates. And when you eat them, that means you are eating them to get energy. That energy is very important because it allows you or your body to perform different activities. Students, apart from carbohydrates, we have talked much about them as the source of energy, but we can also eat lipids to get energy, which means lipids can also be used as the source of energy. Now, from today, you have to know different foods you can eat in order to get energy. You have to know why your body needs energy to perform different activities: movement, contraction and relaxation of muscles, movement of nerve impulse from different body organs to the brain, contraction and relaxation of the heart when it is pumping blood to and from different parts of the body, opening and closing of the eye, also the mechanism of breathing. When you're breathing in, because you need oxygen, when you're breathing out, because you need to remove carbon dioxide, there is need for energy because muscles of respiratory system are contracting and relaxing. Students, you must know three main classes of carbohydrates: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. You must be able to give minimum 3 examples from each. It is much better if you can give more than that. You must know where we get those sugars. What can we eat to get them? Before we wind up or we end our lesson today, here we have homework. And to test your understanding, you can do these questions. The first question is, give any 2 functions of carbohydrates in our body. Why do we need carbohydrates in our body? Question 2, which elements make carbohydrates? You must be able to mention those elements. Question 3, give 10 examples of foods which contain carbohydrates. Here, you can even give more than 10. And remember, when you are eating, eat with a purpose. What are you going to get from that food? How is it important to your body? Question number 4, name 6 food nutrients. You must be able to give 6 different classes of food nutrients which are needed by the body. Remember, they are very important because they perform different functions in our body. Thank you very much for your time, for your active participation. Active participation here, I mean, you followed all the steps of the lesson, which is very good. That will allow you to answer or to do your homework. Thank you for today.